Good afternoon, everybody. And I do mean everybody. I like to see everybody chatting each other there in the chat section before we get started. That's always good to see. However, I see 2 p.m. So shall we get started? So first of all, who am I? My name is Eric Malice, and I am the Chief Product Officer here at National Test Systems. I see a lot of familiar names popping up in the chat. I see a lot of familiar names in the people list. So thank you for coming back, or thank you for coming, even though you've already met me before. So be patient while I introduce myself to the newcomers, and then we'll be able to get the ball rolling on this. So again, I'm the Chief Product Officer here at National Test Systems, and I'm also the co-founder of National Test Systems. I have about a little over 21 years experience now at this. And ever since we started the company, my brother and I started this company, my brother was always the one who knew he knew about business. He knew how to run a business. He knew about sales. He knew about managing inventory. He knew about marketing. The only thing that I really was very, very interested in all of this was learning the technical aspect of the business. I wanted to know everything about how the drug tests work. I wanted to know everything about the metabolic pathway of substances in the human body. I wanted to know about all the way that the drugs interacted with the body. Really, I wanted to know all things clinical toxicology, but especially as it relates to what we're doing here, to drug testing. We at National Test Systems think that education is hugely important. It's to us, it's the most important. It's what we really want to focus on. I mean, anyone can send you a box of cups. Anyone can send you a box of pregnancy tests. But to stand behind them, number one, and to provide you support, provide you with information, to provide you with training and education and updates about new substances coming out. It's really been the focus of our company. And of course, for me, luckily for me, it falls on me. And I get to put my 20 plus years experience to the test. And judging, we've got 158 people here right now, and I see others are still logging on. And it seems like you guys agree with me, at least the 158 of you who are here right now. And I'm so thankful for that. We as a company are so thankful for that. We think it's just so important. And again, it appears that we're not the only ones, and I'm glad that we're not the only ones. So today we have another in our ongoing series of educational webinars. Today is about 20 minutes or so, give or take, after which we will do a question and answer session. So if you look at the left pane of your screen, you'll see a button for people, button for questions, polls, chats, handouts. If you would, please focus your questions onto the questions button. I am going to wait until the presentation's over before I get to questions, and then they'll be first come, first serve. We should be able to get to everyone's questions, but we have a big crowd today, so it's possible that we don't. We don't have a hard limit, but I don't want to keep everybody here all day. I know your time is very important, and don't want to have to keep you here for an hour on a session that might have normally been a half an hour. So for some reason it's dragging on. We may not get to every question today. However, if that is the case, just know that your consultant will be reaching out the next day or two. And at that time, they will, number one, obviously answer any unanswered questions. A lot of times I'll jump in because I read the logs after these as well. Any requests you may have, you can put in the questions, that sort of thing. But again, your rep will be reaching out to you in the next couple of days, and they'll give you an opportunity to, besides just answer the question, they're going to give you an opportunity to pitch topics for future webinars. They'll also give you an opportunity to request a direct training between myself and your staff, either on this subject or on any other subject that you think might be useful. Now, the interesting thing about this one is it might trigger a lot of ideas for trainings that you want. I'll explain more to that as we go on. So again, the reason we do these, number one, is we just think education is hugely important. And number two, we hope that these trainings, these sessions, make your daily drug testing duties a little bit easier, or if nothing else, at least a little bit more insightful. So what are we talking about today? Today we are talking about gas station dope. Just really love the way that title flows off the tongue. So a little backstory on that. So some of you deal with your consultant being Zach Kozlow. If you are on Team Zach, one of you guys, and I'm sorry, we don't remember who, but it was one of Team Zach who said, hey, yeah, I want to know more about this gas station dope. And when I first heard the term, I knew almost immediately what he was talking about. And I said, that's great. There's so many new drugs that we're seeing at your neighborhood convenience store. And I would have never thought to, use that term gas station dope, even though it's so perfectly appropriate. I mean, even in this first slide, you can see you've got your Kratom right next to your lotto machine. So it's obviously, and Cheez-Its too, missed Cheez-Its first time around. So it's actually such a perfect title. But the more interesting thing is, as I did some research on this topic, I found that this term gas station dope has actually been around a little while. And I'm kind of annoyed that I didn't think of it first, but here we are. If you do a Google search for gas station dope, you're going to get millions and millions of results. Now, a lot of the results that they're going to focus on is the first subject of our gas station dope webinar, and that's tianeptine. We're also going to talk about what I call the deltas, which is all the new Delta 8, Delta 10, CBD, all the different new, hemp products. We're going to talk about Kratom. We're going to talk about really everything, especially pretty much anything you see in this photograph here, except the Cheez-Its we're going to talk about here today in our topic of gas station dope. And we're going to talk about some stuff that I like to call gas station adjacent. So let's jump right into the first one we're going to talk about, and that one is tianeptine. So tianeptine is one that we hear about more and more. As you can see in this photograph, this is taken from a convenience store, and it's usually sitting there somewhere near the CBD products, maybe next to the Kratom products, that sort of thing. Probably the most common slang or word for it I hear is called Tiana. Tiana is actually one of the brand names that we're seeing. We're also hearing brand names like Zaza. And it's typically, like we talk about with Kratom, there's going to be Tiana Red or Zaza White. But these are all basically different names or different styles of the same product. Typically, it's going to come most commonly, actually, the only way I've seen it is in capsule form. Although I imagine anything that they sell in capsule form, they also sell in powder form, just have not yet come across it. So look most commonly for these bottles like you see here that have big capsules in them that are obviously stuffed with the powder that is the active tianeptine. So tianeptine itself is an atypical antidepressant with antidepressant and anxiolytic properties. Anxiolytic basically means anti-anxiety. Basically, it is similar in chemical structure to TCA, which is tricyclic antidepressants, which is a very no longer common medication that used to be for antidepression. Sorry. We were actually for a minute hopeful that the standard tricyclic antidepressant test would actually detect tianeptine use, but unfortunately that is not the case. What makes it really unique, even as an atypical, which already just the word atypical means it's unique, but even more atypical or more unusual is this is a medication or this is a substance that actually is active as an agonist against the mu opioid receptors in your body. So if you want to go by technical definitions, tianeptine is an opioid. By definition, anything that is an agonist or an antagonist on your opioid receptors, whether it's mu or kappa, those are to be considered opioids. One thing about the way this interacts with the opioid receptors in your body, it makes it very, very highly addictive. Now, I have read, unfortunately, I can't find any scientific data to back this up or any kind of nice chart that I can show you to back this up. But from anecdotal evidence, from stories I've read online of people who have been involved in taking tianeptine, anything I can find points to the fact that the addiction of tianeptine, the withdrawal from tianeptine addiction, is worse than heroin. I've read stories that it's worse than fentanyl. I've read stories that it's worse than benzodiazepines. So again, none of this is backed up by any real statement of fact. Unfortunately, this is still a pretty new substance, so we're not going to get too much fact on this just yet. But anecdotal stories from people who have used the substance report severe addiction and very severe withdrawal. So it is definitely something to be, alert, if nothing else, for that reason. The other reason you want to be worried about it is basically the most common effects on your body is sedation and euphoria. Euphoria is not medically scary, but sedation can be. Remember, sedation includes a reduced heart rate, reduced cardiovascular rate. So if taken in large enough quantities, this could completely arrest your system and cause an overdose. Now, of course, anything's a poison taken high enough dosage, but the simple fact that this is technically an opioid leads me to believe, and again, I can't find any thorough scientific data to back this up, but the chances are definitely higher of an overdose from tianeptine than something like kratom, for example, or even codeine for that matter, which has a much lower percentage of active ingredient. So that one, everywhere. I see that every corner store I go to, I'm seeing this tianeptine. All right, next I want to talk about something I just call the deltas, because it's easier to talk about in a group context. But I am going to break it down for you because there is enough of a difference that they're worth explaining slightly differently. But before we delve too far into this, because the naming can be a little confusing, I want to clarify one thing. So when we talk about THC in the past, 1,000, 2,000 years, we talk about THC. What we're really talking about is delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. That is the active ingredient in pot. It's always been what the focus has been on. The worrisome use of marijuana is this delta-9 THC. So when the federal government first outlawed cannabis, in addition to cannabis as a whole group of plants, they specifically outlawed delta-9. So that's the one that's always been the focus for as long as we've focused on marijuana in this country as a drug of abuse. So when we talk about delta-8 and we talk about delta-10, really that's delta-8 tetrahydrocannabinol. So it's delta-8 THC. Delta-10 is delta-10 tetrahydrocannabinol, or delta-10 THC. So for the sake of our conversation here, if I'm going to say THC, I'm talking about the delta-9. If I'm talking about the delta-8 or delta-10, I will say that explicitly. CBD, while in a similar category, we won't need to use THC for that. It's quite so much, so no worry there. So much like any other marijuana, all these products come in many different strains and variety. If you're familiar at all with marijuana culture, or even if you're not, you've probably heard terms like OG Kush or Mandarin Dream, or some of these other really fanciful names that they use for strains of marijuana these days. Well, all these same strains, for the most part, can be found in all of these products, whether it be delta-8 or 10 or CBD. In addition to that, we see the different varieties that we find with marijuana. We find indica, we find sativa, and we find hybrids. In addition to that, all these products come in the same format as you would find, especially in places where you have legalized marijuana. You're going to find the flower. You're going to find, vape pens for it. You're going to find edibles like gummies and cookies. You're going to find really almost every imaginable form of this that you would find of marijuana. Now, I'll take it a step further. I have seen an actual bud of delta-8. And I know a little bit about marijuana. I've been in this 21 years. I could not look at a bud from a marijuana strain and look at a bud from a delta-8 strain. And by looking at them, I would never notice the difference. I'm sure there are people out there who are going to come at me for that. Obviously I'm not a professional at that, or I probably would notice the difference. But if I saw, a bunch of buds in a bag or something, I would assume it was just weed. I wouldn't even think it could be delta-8 or delta-10 or CBD for that matter. But they all come in these different formats. So it's nothing new in that regard. It just makes it that much more troubling if you're in a program or if, whatever it may be, where you're allowing the use of these things because they're legal, but you find that around the house, you won't really know necessarily whether it is true delta-8, delta-10, delta-9, whatever it might be. So that is something you need to be aware of. As far as the legality of these products as a whole, so a lot of these things became legal along with the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018. And basically, this act legalized the production of commercial hemp. Now, commercial hemp is the less potent cousin to the pot plant. It's really the same plant. It's just the way that it's cultivated that makes it different, that allows or prevents the buildup of the delta-9 THC. So by law, by this Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018, industrial hemp can contain up to 0.3% THC. And again, THC, we're talking about delta-9. So it can contain up to 0.3% of THC. So let's start with CBD. So CBD has been around probably the longest of these three. If somebody uses CBD, and even if it is a perfectly produced CBD with only that 0.3% of THC, That's oftentimes enough THC to trigger a positive result on an instant drug test, which is great. Now we've got a positive test. It's great. We want to know when someone's using these substances. The only downside there is we don't know if this positive came from the little bit of impurity in the CBD. And when I say impurity, I mean THC. We don't know if it came from that 0.3% of THC or if it came from using regular Delta 9 or regular marijuana. So it can be tricky this way. If we further sent this out to the lab for confirmation, they're going to detect that Delta 9 and they're going to report it positive for the Delta 9. But there's no way for the laboratory to ensure that that Delta 9 came from either the CBD or if it came from somebody actually using marijuana with Delta 9. So it does make it a little tricky in that regard. And it's not always been a huge problem in a lot of cases because for the most part, CBD is not thought of as an intoxicant. It's not something people typically use to get high because it's not really something that by most accounts is something that will get you high that much, especially compared to Delta 9 if pot's always been their drug of choice. So keep that in mind. It gets a little trickier when we get onto the Delta 8 and the Delta 10s. So with both the Delta 8 and the Delta 10, both these substances are close enough in the molecular fashion that they will cross-react and cause a positive result on the instant THC panel. So this is good. Now we see that they use Delta 8, they use Delta 10. We've got a positive. We didn't want them using these products. We've got a positive. We can confront the situation and decide what to do about it at this point. The trouble here is while the Delta 8 and Delta 10 will be close enough for an instant test, at a laboratory, they're only going to be searching for that Delta 9. Now, the Delta 8 and the Delta 10 may be neighboring this substance in its makeup. It's not quite close enough for the laboratory to trigger a positive. Again, they're looking specifically for Delta 9. That's always the way they've been set up to do. That's the way the law is. They want this illegal substance to be detected. So you might come into a situation where someone uses Delta 8 or Delta 10, triggers a positive result on the instant test, but unfortunately you're unable to confirm that out with the laboratory. So that's going to be problematic for some people, if not most. The advantage that you have here as a program coordinator or you're running a probation and parole department, when we think of CBD, again, as not necessarily an intoxicant and not as worrisome, Delta 8 and Delta 10 are both substances that will absolutely get someone high. So it makes it a little bit easier from a program management standpoint to say, you know what, we're just not going to allow this substance. We know it's an intoxicant. The point of our program is to keep our people from participating in use of intoxicants. Let's just completely not allow it. And then if somebody does come up positive and says, oh, it's because I used Delta 8, well, we've already told you can't use Delta 8. It's a similar argument to poppy seeds, similar argument to other legal substances like alcohol, where we have to decide whether is it the legality that's the big issue or is it the target of our program? And that's really the important part. So again, it's a little tough for me to make the decision sitting on this side of the desk, but I do want to let you know that is an option that I hear a lot of folks talking about. And I do apologize. I'd hate to go back. I'm not actually going to back up a slide. But regarding testing of these substances, we just talked about tianeptine in the last slide. Unfortunately, at this time, there is no test, either instant or laboratory, for tianeptine. So again, I don't always love providing you guys with new problems that I'm not also in the same breath providing you solutions. But I think it's more important that you're aware of these things, even if I can't wave a magic wand and fix them for you. This especially, we opened up a loophole with the Agriculture Improvement Act, and these sly chemists, they drove a truck straight through that little loophole. So it's just something we're going to have to work through until we get a better handle on it, until we get better testing, that sort of thing. But again, it is worth mentioning enough that even if I can't fix it for you, it's better off that you at least know about it. All right, the next one on our list is something called Phenibut. Now, this one really doesn't quite fit into our gas station dope category. And the reason is I have not seen this shit at any of the convenience stores near me. I live in South Florida, for those of you who don't know, and we're pretty loosey-goosey with a lot of this stuff. I mean, there's a store half a mile from my house, and I can walk in and get everything that we're going to talk about here today but I have not seen them with this Phenibut yet. I'm sure once word gets around that people are using it to get high, we will start seeing this in the corner stores as well. I mean, it's just if there's an opportunity for money to be made without breaking any real laws, then these convenience stores operate on a pretty paper thin margin. I imagine they'll sell anything that can draw attention or draw traffic to their stores. So I understand. Now, this Phenibut is typically sold more in health food stores like a GNC, any place where you might buy supplements for people who are like bodybuilders and, definitely, weightlifters, that sort of thing. If you guys are buying your creatine somewhere or your powdered protein somewhere, don't be surprised if you see this Phenibut, sitting on the shelf nearby. Now, this one is actually a central nervous system depressant, which anytime we talk about depressants, it is worrisome because it slows down your respiratory, slows down your heartbeat. Excuse me. So because this is so new, I haven't really found any information about overdosing. But again, as I mentioned in the last slide, anything is toxic if you take enough of it. So do be aware of this. This is actually a medication in some places, not in the US, but I think in Canada and I forget what other countries. And the places where it is regulated and sold as a medication is used to treat anxiety, and mainly anxiety and insomnia. And again, those are two conditions that kind of, get your blood pressure up and get your heartbeat up, where this is used to try and kind of counter that and depress your central nervous system and kind of even the keel that whole thing out. So again, right now, it's still not regulated by the DEA in any way in the United States. So like everything else, the DEA has not bothered to step in. It is sold as a dietary supplement. So again, it doesn't quite meet our gas station definition, but I hear enough about it now that I thought it was worth bringing this up to your attention. So at least you can keep an eye out for it and maybe recognize the container it comes in case you see it laying around one of your residential places or one of your probationers' residences when you go to visit, whatever it might be. So do keep an eye out for it. Definitely intoxicant, definitely something you want to keep your eye on. All right, next we're going to talk about Kratom. So listen, Kratom deserves its own webinar. No, sorry, Kratom has its own webinar. So if you really want more information on Kratom, I suggest to go back and watch the webinar. Drop a note in the chats and comments. If you can't find it on our website, I'll make sure I send it to you. But this definitely deservedly has its own webinar. Of all the things we're talking about today, this one is probably still the most prominent. But real quick, I wanted to touch base because, again, it shares much of the same shelf space, if not more, than a lot of the other things that we're talking about today. I can't go into, aside from the big corporate chains like 7-Eleven, Circle K, any neighborhood convenience store, especially down here in the wild west of South Florida, I see Kratom everywhere. It is everywhere. Now, the legality on Kratom is similar to some of the other things we talked about, where it's legal federally. DEA has not stepped in to make it illegal federally. But Kratom, now that it's been in the news so much, we have a lot of smaller municipalities and cities and county areas that have either banned it outright or made its sale illegal. Just one example off the top of my head, Tampa in the west coast of Florida here has completely been outlawed. Kratom has been outlawed in Tampa, not Tampa been outlawed. So, if you're going to go visit Tampa, don't bring your Kratom with you. Kratom, we usually see in a couple of different formats, either as a powder, sort of a greenish, grayish, brownish powder. We see it as a crushed leaf, which looks like, dried leaves that have been crushed up. And we see it a lot in capsules as well. And much like everything else that we're talking about today, they have different strains that they claim do different things. You'll hear names like Mang Da or Malaysian red vein or Thai green vein. But we're all talking about the same plant here. We're talking about a plant that has the same effects regardless. And again, as a substance, it is very interesting. And I do encourage you to take a look at the webinar that I've already done for Kratom. And again, this kind of harkens back to my point at the beginning with Kratom, with the deltas, with Tianeptine. If you're looking for an excuse to take an hour of my time and have an in-depth conversation about one of these things, I mean, a lot of these things could do their own webinar. Obviously, Kratom can, and that's even with me doing an abbreviated version. So, if you're looking for training, you see a lot of these things in your neighborhood, you want more information, you want a deeper dive, this is absolutely what you would ask your consultant about when they reach out. This is what I'm here for. I want to have you guys as educated as possible, and that goes hand in hand along with that. So again, do keep an eye out for kratom because it is still everywhere. As I usually like to try and do, I like to sneak in a bit of good news where I can. So this was probably what I would consider the original gas station dope, both these K2 Spice and the bath salts. Well, if we really want to take it back, the OG gas station dope was probably beer and wine, except, I know you people in Pennsylvania don't have that. Convenience store, beer and wine everywhere down here. Um, Cigarettes, my wife's from Johnstown, PA, and there's a store up there called Habits, and they basically sell cigarettes, lottery, beer. So, gas station dope, it's been around for a while, just in other forms. So you're just getting a little more savvy now, as it were. So I did want to bring this up just again to inject a little bit of good news. Basically, these items are now only to be found on the black market. So you're no longer going to see these sharing shelf space next to the Cheez-Its in your local corner store, at least not legal anyway. So again, that is great news for all of us. Because remember, a lot of times these things become very popular because A, they're legal, and B, there's no test to detect them yet. Now, both those advantages have been taken from these two substances. We have a test for it, federally illegal. So now that's been basically, it's been swept under the rug to the black market, the illegal market, and that's good for us because it loses its popularity. And we've talked a lot about these things in other webinars, especially the trends webinars. And these are serious substances in their own right. So it's definitely good that these things are no longer so prominent because of their ease of attaining at the corner store. The first slide, and I didn't really point it out to you, but basically I call my neighborhood convenience store, the new drugstore. It's basically what it is. A lot of my webinars, I talked about how a lot of addiction, a lot of drug misuse and abuse starts in the family medicine cabinet. Well, a lot of it also starts in the neighborhood convenience store. So, again, this little tidbit of good news, let's be glad for it and take that for what it's worth. And then one last thing that I noticed also recently as I was doing research for this and visiting actually a lot of convenience stores around here is I'm seeing a ton of paraphernalia. I go in there and there's glass pipes, there's bongs, there's, if you ever see a little glass tube like this big with a little artificial rose inside it, that's a crack pipe. It's a pipe that people use to smoke crack and meth. So a lot of these things are sold under the guise of little decorative things, but there's really, you can go into your neighborhood store and, you could outfit a party for the weekend. It's kind of insane. In fact, if you go to a gas station to see somebody stocking up on this stuff, maybe let them get a mile down the road before you get on the same highway with them and drive around in the same town. Again, these are all very dangerous intoxicants, so do keep that in mind. All right, I see we do have a couple of questions up here, so let's go ahead and get started with those. Chris Montgomery asks, will we ever see the government step in and make these illegal? I can't imagine that we won't. Let me back up a sec, sorry. The hope is that yes. Kratom, again, has been the one that's been around the longest. If we're going to focus back a sec to the bath salts and the K2, then we can see they do it. It's not very quick. The federal government is not very agile. They can't move very fast when it comes to reacting to new threats like this. So if we had something like I hate to say it, but if we had a spate of overdoses from any one of these things and it started getting news coverage, then you would definitely see some outcry and you would see the federal government step in and try and do something with these to take steps to hopefully ban them on a federal level. So while I have no evidence that these are being done now, I've seen stories of kratom conversations happening federally, but you can see it's not a fast turnaround. So fingers crossed, and I'm sure we'll see it at some point. I was told by local drug court that they can now test for Tianeptine through Redwood. Is this true? I don't have a ongoing relationship with Redwood, but you can be sure that I will reach out after this webinar and find out if this is the case and find out if it's something that we can offer. Cindy, luckily this question will will show up in the log later, and I will definitely be able to circle back around and follow up with you on it. I hope it's true. And listen, even if it's something I can't offer, I'm going to let you know about it, because I'd rather you have access than whatever, than just trying to be difficult for the sake of a sale. That's just not the way we are. And you've talked to any of us for a period of time, you know that. So count on it. And we will definitely take a look and bring new information if we're able. All right, Ron Williams asks, I am now seeing Fireball whiskey. Yeah, actually, I almost brought this up at my local convenience store. How are they getting away with that? So I saw this too. I should have added it. You know what? Thanks, Ron. I appreciate that. So listen, Florida, I know, is a little bit different. Every state is a little different with regards to selling beer, wine, and spirits. I called out Pennsylvania early just because I have, in-laws there now, and I see what we go through if you want to get, a bottle of something for, whatever it might be, an event. In Florida, anyway, and around the country, now that I know about this stuff, most places you can usually sell beer and wine and malt beverages in your local convenience store, grocery, 7-Eleven, whatever it might be. And I find that's true for most states. So when I saw the Fireball in my local store, I'm like, no way, what is that? So I did a little research on that. So it turns out the Fireball whiskey that you thought you saw is actually Fireball. Subtle, same graphics. By the way, for those of you who don't know, Fireball whiskey is a cinnamon-flavored whiskey, very popular with young people. Anything that's sweet for people who don't like the taste of alcohol that much always becomes very popular. So what this is actually something just called Fireball, and it turns out that it is a malt beverage that is flavored with cinnamon. The ones here in Florida come in at about 16% alcohol. For comparison, Fireball whiskey is, I think, 34 or 36% alcohol. So it's definitely a lesser proof than your standard, whiskey, obviously. But it's higher proof than most craft beers typically top out at like 13 or 14. Most wines are usually a little bit less than that. So yeah, as far as for what you're going to get at a convenience store, it is definitely a high proof. But compared to the quote unquote real deal from a liquor store, that's it's a little bit less than that. So that's how they're getting away with it. It's not whiskey, it's a malt beverage with cinnamon flavoring. So hopefully that answers your question. Matthew says, is there a primary source where synthetic drugs are coming from, or is this largely decentralized? It depends on it a lot. So, for example, Kratom comes from Southeast Asia. So, the places we think are coming from, like Indonesia and that sort of thing, aren't typically known as huge exporters. So I wouldn't be surprised if anything that comes from the Asia area of the world, a lot of it's going to come through China. Obviously they're very entrepreneurial, and if they see a way where they can import something from Malaysia or one of their smaller neighbors and then repackage it and send it to the US, then they absolutely will take advantage of it if there's money there. But as far as a primary source, I don't think it's like a cartel scenario where they're saying, find the next thing, find the next thing, find the next thing. I think they just see that these convenience stores are now giving shelf space and giving display space to these items, and that these items are selling. And, anyone with an entrepreneurial spirit and some with maybe, I don't want to say low morals, because I don't, that's a whole argument for a different day. Somebody with an entrepreneurial spirit, maybe not caring about what product they're selling, will try to take advantage of money any way they can. So, Matthew, I'm going to do a little more research. I don't think that there's some cartel-like situation going on, especially as varying as the products are and as far as many different manufacturers are making them, but I'll definitely do some research on that. Keenan asked, I've been told Kratom is most similar to opioids. Is this true, and is there official classification? So I don't know that the term opioid technically is an official classification. In my definition, anything that will interact with your opioid receptors in your body should be considered an opioid, just like anything that interacts with your cannabinoid receptors in your body should be called a cannabinoid. That's why K2 spice is called synthetic cannabinoids, because it interacts with the cannabinoid receptors. So in that case, it is. However, the way it interacts with the opioid receptors in your body are a little bit different than every other opioid we talk about, with the exception of perhaps buprenorphine. Excuse me. Kratom is what they call a partial agonist to the opioid receptors, which in theory would make it slightly less addictive, slightly make, if processed correctly, a safer pain medication. I do touch on this a little bit more detail in my Kratom blog. So I'll go through the notes afterward, and I'll make sure that you get a link to that blog. And if you still have questions afterwards, we can have a discussion about it. Or maybe it's time for Kratom Part 2 blog, if that's the case. Or, sorry, Kratom Part 2 webinar. All right. Caitlin, I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing everyone's name, I'm sure, so I apologize in advance. I don't have my readers on. How much alcohol content was in that malt? So the one that I see at my store, one of my store has Fireball, and they also have a Smirnoff. The Fireball was 16% alcohol, and I think the Smirnoff was 20% alcohol. And again, both are malt beverages. So at one point in my life, before I really started getting into this, I thought there was a limit as how much alcohol could be produced in a beverage that is brewed or fermented. And I thought you had to distill alcohol to make it above a certain proof, a certain percentage. I think that my initial thought on that was wrong, and I will have to go back and do some more research. I mean, I've seen beer. There is like a Sam Adams specialty beer that gets released like 10 bottles a year or something insane like that. Utopia, if you're curious, look it up. And they manage like 20-something% out of beer. So I don't know if it's a matter of fermentation or brewing coupled with aging. Perhaps the extra aging makes the difference. The price point of this Fireball at my convenience store, I can't imagine they're aging it very long. So I'll have to look, but I imagine there is a maximum amount of alcohol you can get without turning to distilling as the process to create it. But I'm going to do a little more research on that. Ron wants to know, do you sell Kratom tests? If so, what kind? Yes, we absolutely sell Kratom tests, either as an individual dip test or as part of, I think we have a 16 or an 18 panel that includes the Kratom now. I know the sales team is going to yell at me if I got that wrong, but yes, it is available. We've had actually an excellent, reliable Kratom test for a little over a year now, if I'm not mistaken, maybe even 2. Cutoff is 250. It's testing the active alkaloid that's found in Kratom, which is Midograenia speciosa, something like that. So that is available. Please talk to your consultant. If you're not already working with someone, just drop a note in the chat section, and we'll make sure someone gets in touch with you about it. Muskan says, I Googled Phenibut and GABA also popped up. Sold at grocery stores and vitamin section. Ooh, supposed to help with anxiety, just in case you weren't aware of GABA. I've heard of GABA. I don't get many calls about GABA, and maybe I should have just included it inherently. It's just we have had a recent spate of calls on Phenibut. So even though I didn't have a ton of new information on it, I at least wanted to acknowledge the people that had asked about it, let them know, we're looking into it, we're learning about it. As soon as we have a good amount of information, we'll bring it to you. I don't know, maybe perhaps the two are closely related enough in chemical makeup that they could do like a magic catch-all test where it detects both those things. I mean, that'd be great. I don't like to get too hopeful with these things, but I'll definitely do some more digging. And if worse comes to worse, when we go to our next webinar that's on this topic or an adjacent topic, we'll make sure we take a deeper dive on that. Corinne asked, will Kratom show up under any particular substance on a drug test? As of right now, the only panel that it is causing a reaction is on the Kratom panel. So unfortunately, it's not going to cross-react on any of the existing panels that you're testing now, unless one of those panels is a Kratom panel. All right, I'm going to cheat, put my readers on. Sorry, folks. Ira asked, do you keep your inventory on site? Absolutely. We have a nice air-conditioned warehouse. Got a forklift that's pretty brand new and a guy to drive it. We've been very fortunate. This is kind of off topic for this webinar, so Ira, let me make it quick if I may. We're very fortunate. We're in South Florida. Port of Miami is huge. May not be as big as Los Angeles or Long Beach. May not be as big as Jacksonville or Tampa. We've got a pretty big port here. Our only delay in getting product into our warehouse has been a shortage of truckers at this point. Our containers never sit out on the water when they come in. They come right into the port. And in most times, we've got a trucker there waiting for customs clearance. So our warehouse is packed to the gills. We've been, again, very fortunate. I know a lot of distributors out in the West Coast have had problems. So, knock wood, if you're one of our customers, thank us that we planned well for this. And that we were in Florida instead of California. But yeah, we've been fortunate, Ira, and everything we've talked about today is available. All right, Matthew Graff says, do any predictions about how K2 and K3 may evolve? Synthetic seems to be created faster than they can be tested for. That's half right. So there is about, I think it's just under 200 different synthetic cannabinoids that have already been created or discovered, or however you want to put it. And every single synthetic cannabinoid that we have seen come down the pike was something that was invented at least 30 years ago. So there's not really a lot of new substances. What we have is new to the sale in the US. And that's why we had such a bad time stopping in the beginning, because the first two substances were the JWH compounds, JWH018, JWH073. And we said, all right, those two substances are banned. And everyone laughed and said, all right, we've got another 198 substances to choose from. So they're just working their way through the list. So I think unless somebody's actually out there developing new synthetic cannabinoids, I like to think we've seen all the ones we're really ever going to see. Is kratom taken by itself or mixed with anything else? I have seen it both ways. There are a lot of people have sworn by kratom as pain relief from something that they couldn't get from the oxycodone the doctor was prescribing. They couldn't get it from medical marijuana. Kratom is the only thing that can help their pain. I read story after story about this, and this is actually what delayed one of the big counties here in South Florida, Palm Beach County, was literally on the edge of banning it in the entire county. And there was this huge outpouring of support from people who were using this as a medication because they don't want to do, the more traditional, harsher opioids. Whether they're actually harsher or less addictive is a whole different argument for a different day. But I think there are a good amount of people who are taking it for what they perceive as a healthful reason. That's fine. For the people that are abusing it, I imagine most people who are taking kratom as a drug of abuse are polydrug users to begin with. And either A, they're going to take whatever they can most easily find, or B, if they find two different things and they want to mix them together, that's fine too. So I don't typically hear about it. For example, I don't hear anything about fentanyl being kratom being contaminated with fentanyl, because kratom is still basically being produced by commercial sources. When you've got your black market like heroin, yeah, it's got some fentanyl in it. Who cares? Nobody's checking our work. But with the kratom, you're going to have blowback. You've got a brand to support, that sort of thing. It is a commercial product, so I don't think we're going to see as much of that kind of contamination. But as far as whether they're mixing with anything, it's probably, you want sugar in your coffee or not, it's probably about the same thing. And right now, last one, Mary Portner. What do you know about Gulf Coast Chem? Had a treatment court participant buy 2 MAP online through Gulf Coast Chem. So yeah, I wonder if I could do a webinar on that whole topic. So there is a huge market for research chemicals. There's another one I've heard of called Cayman Chemical. I don't know the steps because I've never tried it. But if you go there, everything we've talked about today, including fentanyl, including all the illegal substances we've talked about, these are all sold as research chemicals. And I imagine if you had a legitimate government-issued license to do research on these substances, you would have no problem getting them. Now, how much of this stuff that we see on the streets, fell off the back of a truck? How much of it was done through forged paperwork to one of these legit companies? How much of it is pure, black market coming from overseas or not? Fentanyl, for one thing, well, yes, it is a research chemical that you could probably get from this Gulf Coast Chemical. Most of the fentanyl we see now are made in huge, super labs that are controlled by the cartels. So, yes, there are a lot of legitimate uses for these chemicals that we talk about as these horrible drugs of abuse. The hope is that they're locked down tight enough that you or I couldn't just go on there with, fake ID from, look, I'm from Government Research Group A, and I want to buy some fentanyl from you. So again, I don't really know how easy or how hard it is to get these things, but there's no question that they are being sold as research chemicals in multiple places online. All right, listen, we've gone long. Did get through all the questions for right now, so I am going to cut it off here. If you guys still have questions, great. When you log off, I think it's going to ask you to do a quick, rate the session and make a comment. If you want to make a comment there, great. Myself, all the consultants are going to pour through the chats and these questions and make sure we get everything answered. If any of you had to leave early, or you wouldn't hear me now, but if any of your colleagues had to leave early and couldn't stay till the end, just know that we do post these recording of these webinars on our website, typically later the same day or the following day. So if you want to, hit me up for a link for that, or just go to our website under the media section, it'll be posted there. And then, of course, most of you've talked to me once or twice before. You've got my direct line or my email address. You can surely reach right out to me and, pick my ear for whatever it might be. So again, I really appreciate you guys today. I'm sorry to take, 45 minutes, a little longer than we usually like to go, but I thought this was important and I'm glad you guys stuck around. So I am going to let you go now. And again, thank you for your time this afternoon. I really do appreciate it. We as a company appreciate it. It's immediate feedback to me to know that you guys spent the time with me, to know that learning about this stuff is important. And now I've got some research to do, apparently. So let's go ahead and get on with it. And I do appreciate it. And hopefully see you next time. And until next time, keep on testing.